speakers that were going to talk. I guess they're going to talk about their art, hopefully in front of their walls. Is that going to happen?
So we're talking from our, speaking of homes, we're all social distancing. And so we are talking from, we've got some folks who are calling in from their studios at PAFA, but also from their homes. We have
yes. Okay.
Different locations. So
I'm 15 hours away from my wall, so be a little tricky, but
yeah. You have a good memory though, don't you, Mary Beth?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, we're getting some professorial questions to start us off with, so I like it. We have a packed program tonight though, so we are going to jump on in and get started. I wanted to say a huge welcome to everyone. I know we're going to have some more people joining us, but for all of you, I'm Abby King, the Assistant Director of Adult Programs here at PAFA, and I'm so excited as a PAFA alum to raise a glass with all of you for our toast to ASE, to really celebrate these students' achievements, their work, and their dedication to their craft. So thank you all for being here, and thank you mainly to our students for showing us this great insight into your work this evening. And I want to mention that the students speaking to you tonight were nominated by PAFA faculty for their achievements. So we're really in great company this evening, getting to see a slice of their work. And before we get started, I'd like to take this moment before introductions to acknowledge that the land on which we are virtually gathering, or where PAFA is located, and where I'm speaking to you all from, are the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, whose presence and resilience in Pennsylvania continues to this day. As I just mentioned, we have a wonderful program for you. We have 7 amazing undergraduate students who are here to share their work and speak with all of you. So it's going to be a little bit of a whirlwind, but that's why we're here for an hour and a half, to make sure we have time to really hear from each of these diverse students. Do note that we are going to try to save a few minutes at the end for questions. So feel free to drop things in the chat, questions, compliments for this fantastic work you're going to see, thoughts in general. I already love seeing some of our professors saying hi to folks. And also please note that we are recording tonight's event, so it will be uploaded to PAFA's YouTube channel later this evening, and I'll drop a link to that in a second. But before I hand things over, I did want to mention that it's ASE season here at PAFA. This is the first of several celebrations that we have for our college graduates. Next week, we have our annual preview party, which you can see the details on this slide. We're going virtual again, but we do hope all of you can visit. Think of tonight as the preview of the preview. And so if you're interested in purchasing some of this amazing artwork, you can please attend that program, get your timed tickets, and support students and student scholarships. I also wanted to mention that the following week, we will have another Toast to ASE for our graduate students. So that's on May 18th. It's free. We'd love for you to join us as well, especially if you leave tonight wanting to see more student artwork. I recommend everybody join us for that program as well. And I have to put in a plug. I know we already had a professor say, are we in front of the work? We're not physically in front of the work, but you can come see it if you are in the area. So the ASE, you can reserve your ticket to visit the museum. It's going to be open to the public from May 14th to June 6th. So make sure if you can come, you can social distance, come see this work in person, because it's wonderful to see the preview online, but there's nothing like seeing an artwork up close and personal. So I'll be sharing links to all of those in the chat momentarily, but a huge thank you for all of you for being here. I'm now going to turn it over to our first student of the night. We have Mary Beth Drabiszczak. Mary Beth, take it away.
Hi, so thank you so much for this opportunity. Like Abby said, my name is Mary Beth Drabiszczak. I'll be graduating this year with a BFA in painting, but I'm actually a recent transfer. So I've had a fairly short time at PAFA, but I'm really thankful for the time that I've had here. Next slide, please. So for the ASE, I've created a series of 8 pastel drawings that are relatively small. This specific piece shown on this slide was an earlier drawing that I've really come to enjoy. My mark making is very indicative of children's scribbles, which some people have mixed feelings about, but I personally kind of love to embody that, which I find to be perfect since these are all photos of myself when I was little. A lot of the smaller work I think of as preliminary studies, especially for work that I'd like to do over the summer that involves larger scale drawings, perhaps on like an 18 by 24 scale that, think of this mother and child theme, very reminiscent of Mary Cassatt, because my mother did pass away when I was little. So I find that making art about my childhood is a way to try and re-remember and also find closure, especially with COVID. I've found a huge importance with, family and really reconnecting with people. So with color here, it seems a little bit of a mess, but I'm pretty purposeful with how I try to choose color. You can kind of see the little red mark on the right with the reference photo, that I emulate that in the drawing too. So it's really much, it's really a lot about abstracting colors that I find in the reference photo and embody them through mark making in my drawings. I choose my pre-toned paper substrate by isolating a color that I find overall in the image, which this image was kind of a tan color. I use Canson-Tiantes paper, and this one's a hemp. Next slide, please. So this image used a darker tone paper, which is a little trickier, but I find that it emphasized the blue electric highlight fairly well. But then this also kind of reiterates, the importance of the reference photo and demonstrating, how I use the reference to also understand color better. As you can kind of see, the orange in the chair has reflections on the bottom of my hair that I've kind of tried to emulate with this red-orange color. Next slide, please. This one was definitely a challenge because, as a lot of painters and PAFA alum and students know, working on a neutral substrate is kind of standard. So introducing bright chromatic paper was a little tricky. And as a Wisconsinite, felt like I had to do something with the Green Bay Packers. So this is of myself when I was little, wearing a Packers shirt. But also, I just really enjoy utilizing paper and embodying the kind of imperfections of paper, emphasizing the deckled edge, kind of speaking to printmaking and paper making. I'm also interested in art conservation, and I'm very thankful to Al Gurry and a lot of other professors at PAFA, as I will be graduating, obviously, through PAFA, but I will be starting my master's in the fall at UWM in art history with a TA position. So I'm grateful to the after school high school program that kind of, helped solidify my interests for, pursuing further studies. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a demonstration of a little bit of my process. I start with, I guess, just a rough outline using pastel pencils, and then I work from harder pastels like Prismacolor to softer, more buttery sticks that kind of tend to crumble, which like Sennelier is a really nice pastel, but a little on the expensive side, but they work great for finishing touches. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of my setup. This is perhaps a little bit of an untraditional presentation. Obviously, this isn't shown in the ASE, but as a materialist, I love not keeping secrets and letting people understand my process and my working methods, because as an individual, I constantly interrogate artists and art lovers. How'd you make that? What'd you do? So I want to answer people's questions so I don't get pummeled with that, but I will answer any questions anyone has, because I love talking about that. Next slide, please. So I mean, as a pastel artist, I find it a little funny that I'm a painting major, but tend to do drawing, but I've recently been accepted into the Pastel Society of America and have kind of found some connections with that organization, which I'm really thankful for. But I've loved the way that, you know, people working in this medium think of it as a kind of painting, which is perfect because I'm a painter. I'm a painting major. So I kind of use this tabaret setup, which is just an IKEA cart. And I also just kind of try to use DIY things, especially with the pandemic, just trying to find useful hacks. So I use pie tins and then actually take chicken wire and hot glue and make little, I guess, kind of sifters. So I sit my pastels on top, so then the dust falls to the bottom. So it's economical, a lot cheaper than buying a huge pre-made tin. Next slide, please. So this is like typical of my studio setup. I'm very methodical. I lay out all of my paper substrates, and images like this I will edit in Photoshop to try and understand how hue corresponds to value, just because I find that this kind of preparatory work is essential when I do go forward with choosing a reference image and then eventually making additive marks onto the paper. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, I will not be able to see the ASE in person as I am in Wisconsin, but I'm very thankful to Brian and Kate for all their work. I was able to ship my work, and part of the reason why I worked small is just understanding the complications of shipping and just trying to be practical and economical with kind of my expectations for myself and you know, this kind of reality that we're all in right now. But these are a lot of fun to work on. You know, I've talked with some of my critics and have kind of second guessed, do I have enough work? But, you know, I think I really enjoy this intimate setting that's created by these smaller works. It kind of parallels flipping through a photo album that you would dig up in the basement or in the attic, which I think is really reminiscent of, you know, my work in using old photos, and is really just trying to find old familial ties and get closure within personal connections, which is kind of why these marks are, you know, suggestive, just because, you know, a lot of these photos aren't very clear, they're blurry. So I find that, you know, the power of suggestion is really powerful within mark making. But anyway, you can find my setup in Gallery 12. But I also set this up very purposeful, just with understanding the direction of the gaze, especially within art history, we're kind of aware of, you know, the male gaze and understanding how, you know, a kind of individual depicted in a painting or a drawing would interact with the viewer. And I was really interested in lining these up so as like these images of me never really, I guess, directly interacted with the viewer, but it was kind of like an animation, like kind of polyptic of head movement. So I like thinking about all these things, and, you know, normally everything I do is like fairly like thought through. These are also all framed, and they are float framed with linen hanging tape, so the deckled edges are emphasized. But yeah, so I definitely encourage everyone to try and get out to see the show, especially because I can't. So with that, I'll wrap up, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mary Beth. That was great. My name is Callie Coccia. I'm a PAFA Penn BFA student in painting. I'm graduating this year. Next slide, please. So I feel like my work has, as you could probably tell, it focuses a lot on pop culture and fashion and how these things sort of inform gender and sexuality and back and forth, vice versa. And I feel like that's been a theme in my work for a very long time. And this wall that I've installed this year, I feel is the most mature body of work I've produced in this line of thinking. So I'm very excited to be in the ASE this year. I really enjoy media that stylizes. I feel like it exposes what pop culture and society considers essential to certain concepts in its stylization. So like The Simpsons, for example, I feel like that The the stylization of that show sort of tells us what's essential to concepts like motherhood, or humor, or the family, or basically like even the limits of the human face in visual representation in the eyes of pop culture. And I feel like horror films are also similarly stylized and are an equal source of inspiration for me. And they expose what we consider to be a violation of the normal, and in that way sort of expose what is in the construction of normalcy. So it sort of will sometimes build in these misogynist ideas of like a woman running for her life and stilettos and so on. And this is my most recent piece. Oh, I'm sorry, can you go back to that last one? Thank you. This is my most recent piece. I feel like Shelley Duvall is a really interesting figure in horror, as she represents female characters as well as female actresses in horror films, because she has an especially contentious position in The Shining. During the production, Stanley Kubrick was especially cruel to her and encouraged other cast and crew members to be cruel to her in order to get her performance. And then in the end, her performance is often treated as like the weakest part of the movie. So she's this point of sort of useless catharsis, as well as her character almost. And I just wanted to sort of speak to that like visual and I guess real life meditation on her emotional torture as a form of entertainment. Next image, please. So horror is a big personal influence on me, not only because I feel like there's a lot of theoretical ground to cover, but also because it's just a personal enjoyment of mine. And I think that this piece is a representation of that sort of fusion of the two ideas of like a theoretical enjoyment and a personal enjoyment, because one day I found a Queen of Hearts playing card in my pocket of something that had gone through the wash. And I was like, this is just the most amazing image I have ever seen. It was just a Queen of Hearts. It's just, you know, nothing that I had invented or even done on purpose. So I feel like this sort of like campy, iconoclastic, you know, sort of quintessential image of the Queen of Hearts gone through the washing machine is sort of what I do with pop culture icons. And I put it through the washing machine and turned it into this sculpted object. Next image, please. So my time at PAFA has been very wonderful. I've had the fortune of coming back for an extra year through a travel scholarship. And it's really only through that opportunity and extra time of being in studio that I've had the privilege to sort of have a curious and playful studio experience. It's really helped me develop my studio practice. And through this, I sort of broke out of the rectangular or square canvas as a surface and into canvas as a material, and started like semi-fabricating objects. They're still flat, but they're the shape of the objects instead of representations of the objects. And this was the first image like that. And I was thinking about, with the idea of shape, how clothing sort of shapes your external vessel in the world, and how it is really an embodiment of your physicality, and how gender and sexuality inform those things. And again, that break into shape, next image, please. I consider that, you know, and other like more literal shaping pieces of clothing. So like a corset or next image, a bullet bra. They're like very humorous. They're this combination of shaping the body and undergarments and clothing has like a sort of titillating, pun intended, and humorous effect in the end. And I feel like I was really, that break into the round is what sort of allowed me to focus on this idea of like fashion shaping the body. And additionally, this idea of the shape of the body in combination with like the natural body, so sort of conflating this like completely cartoonish bullet bra shape of the breasts as somehow natural. And then again, a lot of these undergarments are like quote unquote a natural flesh tone. So this sort of impossible natural combination of the two. Next image, please. And that sort of leads into this. This is also one of the earliest pieces I was doing in my studio this year that was sort of focusing on just like pantyhose are such an interesting cultural phenomenon to me because they're like this sort of shell of perfect flesh over the leg, and they're like a false perfect skin. They represent, you know, a perfect color of the leg. It's very funny. And I also was thinking about, next image, please. In the 1940s, women, pantyhose were semi-new, not really, but the sort of mass-produced pantyhose was a sort of a new fashion statement. But during World War II, they had to sort of reroute the nylon being used for these undergarments into sort of military gear, so like parachutes and seatbelts and so on. So I find that connection very funny. And I just wanted to sort of bring that up and have like the sort of scarred body and focus on the line on the pantyhose. And when the nylon was sparse, women started drawing, as you can see here, lines with, I think, like eyebrow pencils and such up the back of their legs to sort of give the impression of pantyhose. So it was really just coming full circle of being unnatural, perfect, sort of a perfect idea of naturalness, which is sort of an oxymoron, and then again, back again to a natural leg. And really just, it was all about signaling the idea of pantyhose and not necessarily actually wearing them. And it's just all a big piece in the cycle of the construction of gender through fashion and culture. Next image, please. And as you can see here, it's a little hard to tell, but I have like glitter as the line up the leg of the pantyhose, just on the insides of them. And I feel like that glitter is just a representation of sort of the false scarcity or the false specialness of the line of the pantyhose. It doesn't matter if the pantyhose are actually there. What matters is that people know that you're wearing pantyhose or that you're trying to wear pantyhose. And that effort into gender and fashion is a really rich area for me. Next image, please. So yes, this year at PAFA has been just such a wonderful time for me. This ability to come into my studio and work and then get feedback from professors, it's been invaluable, and it's really pushed me past the limits of what I thought I could do with my art and what I have been doing with my art. So it's really just been excellent and sort of pushing me into the realm of sculpture, which I thought I foolishly said I would never do a long time ago. And now I'm doing it, and I think to much better results than what I really would have been able to accomplish outside of the studio. So I really hope people can come and see my work as it's sort of become a culmination of this artistic path that I've had for a really long time now. Thank you.
Hello, that was amazing, Callie. So nice to see your work. I am also a painting major at PAFA, and it's nice to follow Callie because I also have moved more into the realm of sculpture in my work. Not anything I ever anticipated doing, but I think the level of tradition at PAFA has sort of pushed me towards experimentation in a way that I never ever expected to be living in. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. During this whole year, I have sort of been forced to adapt. I'm sure like everyone has, and just working with the situation that like my living situation and moving studios and having access to certain types of materials. So all of my work is based in collection of material and repetition of process. So a lot of this year for me has been spent thinking about all the time I've spent in my house, you know, contemplating life and not really going and doing much else because there was nothing really else to do. So with that, I sort of had this concept that I've been thinking about a lot is the nest and how important it is in nature with birds and insects and how it's more of a communal type of situation for those species, which I find interesting, and just the importance of the home to those animals. It's like a living creature in itself, which I find really interesting. You can go to the next slide. And just thinking about your own body as a home, I work a lot with this sort of torso vessel-like form, and just thinking about how important it is to feel present in your own body and living situation, because like I said, in this whole year we've all gone through this really jarring adaptive moment where we're having to all transition, which is an important thing to have to do, but not on such a large scale, I guess. And so for me, these vessels kind of represent a process of like, you know, I spent a lot of time ordering things online this year, and just thinking about consumption and all of the cardboard boxes that I've accumulated over the year, you know, trying to limit my time in public, and having these boxes sort of be like a symbol of this capitalist society that relies on me to consume it, and just kind of wanting to recontextualize what the box was to me and make a more human, organic form that I could relate to. So I spent a lot of time ripping the cardboard boxes apart and sort of trying to get to know them and manipulate them in this way, kind of using these lines to draw in space, is something I think about a lot. And the process of repetition in form for me is like a way of processing time passing and processing my own life trauma, I suppose. You can go to the next slide. So I've made a few of these now, and I love how different they all become. They sort of guide their own form once you get to a certain point in making them. I also spent time collecting charcoal for the insides from friends of mine that have, you know, had fires over the summer or something like that. Just trying to collect all parts of them. So it becomes an intimate experience of creation, not just like, it's, you know, a whole, I'm thinking about it from beginning to end of what parts I need to make them, I suppose. And yeah, I don't know, I got to really love these little objects because they have their own personality, and like I said, they sort of guide how they're made, and they've come to symbolize a lot of different things for me, I suppose. You can go to the next slide. And I wanted to, with this one in the front, I wanted to sort of bring in another element with one of them to create a little bit of a conversation, because I think they have their own thing to say isolated, but I wanted to create a sort of connection between another form. And this is something I'd like to continue with, because these are really, oh gosh, sorry, really emulating drawings that I've made a lot. And that's what I'm thinking of them as, like I said, drawings in space, and just kind of like, it's really interesting to exist in a place with objects like this that are bringing you into another world kind of. And with my work, I like to create families of objects. And this one is, yeah, just creating another conversation between two materials. So the one on the left is just plaster. And I wanted to bring that sort of art historical white plaster into the conversation, and just thinking about the history of vessels, also ancient civilizations relying on this form to survive. And you can go to the next slide. And this is a totally separate work, but a similar approach in process. I made these pieces of paper out of newspaper that I also collected from the year. I decided to get a newspaper subscription because I was tired of getting my news from the internet and wanted to be really, I don't know, informed on how the city I was in as an organism was existing, I suppose, and how it was moving through this really turbulent year that we've had. And I sort of translated that into this cycle of like life and death, and moving through the world on like more of a macro level, in a celestial way. But I think all of my work does stem from, well, at least right now, just my direct experience and trying to make it more accessible through abstraction and shape and form and line. And yeah, I don't know. That's, I guess, all I have to say.
Thank you, Abbey. So hi, my name's Kaela Pinizzotto. I am a drawing major, printmaking minor, currently finishing up my last semester here at PAFA. Some of you may know me and some of you may not, but I thought I'd just share a little bit about myself with you all. Next slide, please. So I grew up in and currently live in a very rural part of South Jersey, surrounded by many farmlands and various animals. So I've grown up surrounded by nature pretty much. And it's been the main subject matter of my work for many years. And making art about nature in a way allows me to express my appreciation for it and also share that appreciation with other people. And throughout the past few years, I never really had like a voice or like a message in my work. At least that's what I felt like. I struggled to find that message in my work. And through this past year at PAFA, through writing a lot about my artwork in many artist statements and applying for travel scholarships and having conversations about my artwork with my professors, my critics, my artist peers, my friends, my family. Through this process, I've realized that it's not just nature that inspires me and my artwork, but also light. And this type of light, as you could see in this photo, is a very like dramatic and fleeting light that casts shadows and creates silhouetted forms, which is something that I'm really drawn to, and I respond to it in a very emotional way that's hard to describe in words, but I've come to describe it as a visceral feeling or a visceral response that I have when I see this type of light as it appears in nature and in landscape. So for the majority of my last year, I've explored this throughout my work, and I also felt it was fitting to make it the main subject and theme of my ASE work for this year. So next slide, please. So this is the first piece in a series of wood engravings that I made this year that focus on light and landscape. And these wood engravings are pretty small in size, but so in this particular image, I was really interested in the very dramatic light that's coming from the left part of the image, and as it silhouettes the trees and also casts these really long shadows, and I wanted to capture that in this wood engraving. So usually for my process for these images, I start with a smaller graphite drawing, and I basically work out the main shapes and forms that I'm looking for in the image, and also the type of light that I'm looking for. And once I have that settled, then I move on to my wood engraving pieces. But the process between the graphite drawing and the wood engraving is very different, because when you're working with graphite, it tends to be a medium that you're able to get very smooth and blended forms and blended gradients. But when you're working with wood engraving, you have to think a little more linearly. And so I tried to capture this gradient that the light was creating in this image in my wood engraving by a process of stippling in the foreground. So for the areas that are a lot lighter in the foreground, I created each dot so that they were very close together to create a sense of strong light. And then as you move across towards the right of the image, I space out each dot so that way it creates an illusion of this type of light source that I love so much. Next slide, please. So for this piece, it's the second piece in my series, which depicts a forest setting where the light is filtering through the trees from the top right and casting a light on the forest floor and the vegetation on the forest floor. And I was really moved by this type of light. So when I started off again using graphite to create a preliminary drawing, and then use that as reference for my wood engraving piece. But I felt that the drawing wasn't putting as much focus on the patch of light on the forest floor that I was so interested in. So when I moved on to my wood engraving, I made sure to keep the surrounding areas at a darker value so that the main focal point would be the patch of light on the forest floor. Next slide, please. And this is the fourth image in my series, which depicts a house that's alongside a creek that my family and I would go to years ago to fish and occasionally go crabbing. So I have good memories of this place. But what captivated me about this image was the light on the house alongside the creek and how bright that was in comparison to the surrounding landscape. So I wanted to recapture this in this piece. So I started off with my graphite drawing again, just getting down the main shapes and forms of the subject matter in the image, and then use that as reference for my wood engraving again. And also keeping in mind to not carve away too much of the surrounding areas. So that way there'd be a lot of contrast in the image and create more of an intensity and light on the house, which is what I love so much about this piece in particular. And also still creating marks that suggest the texture of the trees and also the reflection in the water. Next slide, please. And for this piece, I spent a lot of this semester working on it. It was a big project to tackle for me. It's a much larger piece. It's 26 by 40 inches, which is a lot larger than I'm used to working, as you could tell with my wood engravings, which are much smaller. But I wanted to challenge myself this semester by working on a much larger scale and to see how scale can affect the image and the mood of the image. And also exploring this with a different medium, which was charcoal. So I took inspiration from my smaller wood engraving of the forest floor and recreated this scene in charcoal instead. And I felt that charcoal was a really nice medium to work with for the type of light that I was trying to capture, because with charcoal, you're able to get really soft values and really blended out light, which is a type of light that I love so much. And I consider this piece an embodiment of my journey to claiming light as the main motif in my work, but also using my love for nature and landscape as a way to showcase this light. Next piece, or next slide, please. Thanks. So this is what my finished ASE wall looks like. The very top row of small framed images are my wood engraving series, and then directly below them, there's the preliminary drawings that I just showed you. And I felt it was important to include these because in a way it kind of shows my process and how I think between two different mediums. And I felt that they also inform each other very well. And then on either side of these series of wood engravings, I have two lithos that also celebrate light as a theme in my work. And then directly above them, I have my larger charcoal drawing there. And all these are currently being shown in the rotunda in the HLB building. So I hope you'll have the chance to come and see everybody's work and maybe even see my wall. So yeah, thank you for your time and for listening.
Thank you, Kaela. That was so lovely. Her work is amazing, so you definitely should see it in person because there's nothing like getting up super close to these tiny, beautiful things. My name is Tessa Tallakson. I am a fourth-year painting major, and my ASE is actually all still life paintings. So this body of work really got started for me when I went home for COVID. We went home thinking that we were gonna get to come back. We went home for spring break and we just stayed at home. So for me, it was a time when I was able to really explore what I wanted to paint and why. And I started realizing that I had compared myself a lot and that was really holding me back from doing the work that felt important and really true to myself to make. So this is a body of still life paintings that were inspired, here, next slide, please, originally by hand woven rugs and handmade ceramics. Both of those are sources of inspiration to me, first because I see them as art in and of themselves. They are so beautiful and they have so much evidence of the human hand in their making. It's really just such an awesome thing to be able to work from something that is already a work of art. And then second, because they're present in every culture, and I see them as a link between the human experience. So that was the start of the body of work. And from that, it was kind of a jumping off point. I was inspired by the color palettes in these things, as well as them as objects. Next slide, please. This painting is one that I feel like really shows all of the things that I was gathering in this year that I've been working on this body of work. Again, with the ceramics, but this time also I was showing off the things that I found on the way to school. I would walk to school every day, and whatever nature I could find in the city, I would gather. And there isn't a lot of nature in Center City, Philadelphia, but I would, climb over a barrier or, pick up things off the ground. So I wanted to show the things that I found to be beautiful that other people might just, step right over or pass by. And I also felt like this painting was one that showed me really getting more confident in organizing complexity. Next slide, please. So in this series, since I've just been focusing on still lifes, I've felt like I have learned a lot about the things that I like and the things I would want to do more of. So in every painting, I was learning something that I would take into the next painting, or something that I maybe didn't want to do in the next painting. In this painting in particular, I really got excited about the paint textures that I could get. The shells were just these lovely, very highly textured organic forms, and I would paint very thickly, and then I would come back to it after it had dried and use more thick paint. And when you paint thick paint over a dried layer of thick paint, you start to get very interesting textures happening. You get some of the under layers showing through, and that creates kind of a flickering effect, as well as kind of a crunchy, crusty quality that I really liked. So this was a painting where I kind of discovered that and discovered my interest in the different kind of material effects I could get. I also really love the conversation that happens between the forms. So the shell in the middle really relates to the rounded form of the mountains in the postcard. And then inversely, the shadow underneath the table also relates. So you start in these paintings to see very interesting conversations happening just in subtle ways. Next slide. This is a painting that, again, is just exploring very subtle things that happen within these rugs and objects. This rug in particular was one that I just found almost endlessly interesting. These hand-woven rugs have a lot of character. They're not perfect. They're very irregular. And I really wanted to show that, but I also was fascinated by the signs of sort of age and wear and tear that the rugs had. On the bottom left, you can see where the top layer of thread is completely worn away. And so I think about these things as showing a passage of time and a history of making and a history of use. So they have just become more interesting the more I work with them. And I also was very excited to get to work with these two little Coccia dolls. I felt like they were just a very intimate and sweet moment that was happening, but I wanted it to happen in a subtle way because they're quite bold in their pattern and color. So I really loved what happened when I put them in a painting that was already quite busy. All of these paintings are very textured and much more detailed than these slides are showing you. So if you do get a chance to see them in person, that would really do them justice. And There's so much amazing work in this show. I just can't even begin to tell you how much you should go see it. And also, please reach out to us if you have questions about our works. We really would love to answer it. So thank you.
Hi, thank you, Tessa. So I'm Logan. I'm a fourth year painting major with a drawing, or excuse me, yeah, a minor in drawing, sorry. Next slide, please. And then although my work is based on both real source imagery, I consider myself a realist. There's still a level of abstraction or derealization that is present in my work. Conceptually, I think a lot about perception, particularly the way that we take in our surroundings. So I'm interested in exploring surface both through the textual qualities of my source imagery and the materiality of the work surface itself. So in a way, I'm both feeling something tactily with my hands and with my eyes. And process is also a major factor of my work as well, with my practice revolving around the idea of art making as a meditative process for both the artist and the viewer. Next slide, please. So within the past year, I've returned to drawing as my preferred medium, particularly silver point drawing. And silver point by nature yields itself towards more quiet and delicate work. And during COVID, I moved back in with my parents and I found myself left with so much more time than I would typically have if I was at school. And so in a way, all of this extra time really manifested itself in more intricate, time-consuming work. And so I found myself more eager to make more contemplative work. And so I think that this compulsion is reflective not only of my own, but kind of everyone else's mental state during quarantine. Next slide, please. So I'd like to consider my recent drawings as in the same vein as other artists who also produce similar imagery, kind of like Thea Selmans and Catherine Murphy. Selmans describes her process as retranslations of surfaces. And that's an idea that I really relate to in my own practice. And so my retranslations are obviously very different from Thea Selmans, but one of the main ideas that has come up in my final year of studio is the mapping of surfaces onto the picture plane. And that's probably most obvious in this. I'm working with the grid as well as like this very naturalized, realized pattern. Next slide, please. And so for my ASE wall, I wanted to create a cohesive body of work, so pieces that could stand on their own as well as flow together. And through conversations with my critics, I was drawn towards altar pieces, particularly symmetrical works. And so that's ultimately what I decided on for my ASE wall. Next slide. Yeah, so being in the HLB has been a completely wonderful yet totally unexpected experience for me. It's an honor to exhibit in the same space as a lot of our predecessors. And although I wasn't really sure how my work and the work of my fellow students would function in the space, I'm ultimately very grateful to have the opportunity to exhibit here. I think that this year's exhibition particularly is a wonderful way to send off all of our BFA students. And I know that my installation process and the installation process of my friends has gone pretty smoothly this year. And a lot of that I think is just the way that we're reacting to the space. So thank you. That's it.
My name is Nasir Young. I'm a fourth year illustration student. You can go to the next slide. I'm a Philly native that's constantly looking at the environment of Philadelphia. And most of my work comes about from everyday life within the city, constantly looking, whether it's bricks and mortar, fences, street, people, what they're doing, how they're interacting with the space. My work ranges from literally walking down the streets every day through looking at nostalgic moments, things that capture your eye, things that you ignore. I like to show everyday life as it is. A big chunk of my work is based on my extensive sketchbook practice, as well as documenting and taking thousands and thousands of photos of everyday life that may pop up in work or may never get used altogether. This work in particular was from a little area outside of the city in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, and just capturing like a moment walking down the street and kind of conversations of looking at what's seen, what's unseen. And ideas I've been thinking a lot about within my work is spatial politics of who owns space. What does it mean to exist in space and flow in it, and what kind of beauty comes about knowing who's controlling what's going on in any given moment. You can go to the next slide. This one is part of a series of 2 works that I did. One, just looking at cityscapes. I enjoy buildings. Brick and mortar is fun to paint for me. And just looking at, but also thinking about the city itself when this one is paired with another painting, which will be seen on my wall, of the Boner Forever building in the city. And that kind of juxtaposition combining the center city, which is so taken care of, kind of jewel-esque, and northern parts of the city that you see similar towers and structures, they're abandoned, taken over. And what is that privilege that comes with it? What is the politics behind that? Why is a building left alone to die versus this building, because it's in the center stage, taken care of? You can go to the next slide. And just everyday life. This one is part of my commute back and forth of going to PAFA, going to Center City, driving back at that home, looking at things and almost thinking of the stories that they tell themselves and how things came about. And also for myself as an illustrator, as I found myself painting more in the past year since the pandemic started, I've been primarily oil painting, which is something I swore off entirely before, let alone to find myself doing this now and thinking about conversations of illustration within it, and how to tell narratives and stories within those paintings, and how those little windows I'm looking at kind of open up and expand, and what other stories someone can come about from looking at it that is not just what I'm looking at, but what nostalgia, what stories does bring to your mind to think about when you're passing, that as I drive, I almost call out and see, hey, there's one of my paintings, there's another one. But I hope people also can go about and look at those things that they might ignore and go, wait, this is familiar. Why is that? You can go to the next one. And just moments capturing just through graffiti, just existing, lasting marks, and just the spaces. What stories do they really tell? This one, just the generic snow day. If you think this van covered in snow and graffiti, but you see these footprints leading up to it and showing the marks of someone was there, someone was up to something, but you don't necessarily need the figurative work to show them in the act of doing these things. You can see the presence left behind, and what does that presence exactly mean? And for me, who enjoys these, for some people, this is something they ignore and hate in their community, to see these around and who's in control and whose say matters more than one or another. You can go to the next slide. And this one was a little bit more of bringing my sketchbook practice, which I talked about being very important to me, that I go through probably about 4 or 5 sketchbooks a year, filling up, and I paint directly in my sketchbooks. I collage, I draw, I print in them, and kind of how I compose images, trying to bridge that combination that I've been told. Sometimes my sketchbooks look like actual works themselves, of how to use these conversations I'm talking about and bringing that forward into an actual physical work. With this was exploration for myself and kind of that conversation and that vein of thinking. And these works that I have here are some of the 13 works that I have on the exhibition at the annual student exhibition. And I hope it makes you look around your everyday life and what you see and what you take for granted, and just look at what's actually there, what glows and what doesn't. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was wonderful. As we're coming back here, I suggest folks move into gallery view so you can see many of our amazing students and our PAFA community. I know I'm at least, thank you, Nasir, for ending on that beautiful note of looking at things differently. I know after seeing all of these work, I'm thinking about so many things in my home, from Amazon boxes differently to my Philly streets. So it's really wonderful to have these insights with all of you. I want to make sure we have some time. For once we're not rushed and like kicking you all out, we have a little bit of time to interrogate and ask our fantastic artists some questions. So I suggest, if folks, you've already been putting so many wonderful compliments, students, you need to download these chats. They're so good and wonderful and heartfelt. but feel free to put questions in the chat or raise your hand virtually or flag us down and I will call on folks. I'd love to hear from you on what you think of these fantastic processes. And I'll kick us off by asking, for everyone, the moment you install your ASE wall is, I think, of a really transformational time. And I loved hearing how you all talked about the different ways your work changed and processed through the pandemic. But I was wondering specifically, because many of you installed in the historic landmark building, which is a long tradition at PAFA that we've kind of come back to in the recent years. And so I was curious if there was anything that surprised you or any moments when you put your wall together in that process of actually just either deciding what goes in or hanging it on the wall or figuring out how you had to fabricate it. If you all could share a little bit about how that process influenced what you talked about this evening. Easy question to start us off with.
I can go in that my wall kind of became a happy accident at first, as some of the canvases, if you get to see it in person, is an arrangement of mirroring each other and almost through scenes of like watching it unfold back and forth, that you have to physically go from one side left to right and reading it through, that it was within the space almost complemented and built that story of helping me show all of it together.
I think something that for me that was really different to understand is just obviously the historic landmark building is historic. Today in the gallery world, we kind of have this white wall syndrome where everything is stark white, everything's plain, there's no setting. And this idea that, when we were assigning walls, there'd be wainscoting on some of the walls, which I wasn't really sure how to feel about. But I think it works out great. And I ended up getting one of the spaces with wainscoting, which I originally wasn't sure how that would, I guess, work out, because it kind of reminds me of, I guess, older antique houses that, have that hallway design. But I think that's something really important. I'm trying to remember who mentioned that earlier. I think Logan was talking a little bit about this idea of, really understanding the space and using the architecture to reinforce your design decisions. So I think Logan did a great job of pointing that out. And there's this really gorgeous marble stone under Logan's work. So it's fun to see that.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Mary Beth, because I was about to hop in and talk about that. Yeah, when I was making my work, I always imagined it up on like this very pristine, very white wall. But once I got in the space and I put it up on the red, like I don't think it could go on anything else, if I'm being honest. Like the way that it, works with the stone, the way that the red really makes it pop. I couldn't ask for anything better. Like it's so much better than anything that I could have come up with on my own.
I think for me, it's like really magical to see everyone else's work. Like that was the thing that was so great to me, is like walking up the steps and seeing people that I've, watched how their work has changed over the years and like being installed in such magical ways. It was really a nice thing. I'm excited to see the space filled with humans, and yeah, I think that'll be nice.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how humans interacting with your vessels will change them too, the kind of in those spaces. And thank you everyone who shared already. And you go ahead, Mary Beth.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to jump on because I think in the chat earlier, someone asked Abby, I guess, the size of the vessels. I wasn't sure if there was any other questions, but that was one I know that was listed. So just wanted to make.
Yeah, they're like about maybe almost 2 feet tall. Kind of like the size of your torso, I guess. Is kind of like what I imagine them as. And then some of them are hanging, so they like have a little bit of a height difference when they're hanging, obviously, but
I asked the question, but it was hard to tell the scale. It was really, were they tiny? But they were really cool how you took the cardboard from life and made them into these really neat little vessels. And I think I'm just going to say to all of you, it's very meaningful to hear what inspired you to make your art. It just brings much more meaning to the art. I think more people should see that and listen. It's fascinating. And it's all great in all different ways. So I'm so happy to listen to this. Thank you. And good luck.
Thanks, Katie. I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for all of you for being here. And I see a wave from a friendly face. Ron, do you want to?
Hi, yes. This is again a question about Abby's urns, or her vessels, and I'm calling them urns because she said something about how they relate to body size and her scale, and I could imagine her making them and reaching inside, and maybe the length of her arm from fingertip to shoulder would determine the depth of one of those things. And then I started thinking of them as being comparable to burial urns. And I wonder, Abby, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I like that kind of, because I did paint the inside of them with charcoal, which is kind of like the ashes of the earth, I guess. So that's I mean, I didn't make them with that in mind exactly, but I do like that comparison. Yeah, it's nice to see you, Ron. I haven't seen you in a while.
I know, it's been too long.
Yes.
Thanks, Ron. I like these Zoom connections we're making. And Iris, I see your hand. Oh, you're muted. I'm going to ask to unmute.
Yeah, sorry.
You're fine.
So this was wonderful. This is the first time I'm a member of the Women's Board, and this is the first year I've been able to be part of this, and it's great. And I'm interested in the students. What was it like not to have each other while you were working on your art? I mean, my daughter is this artist, as was my mother, and went to art school, and they always talked about how wonderful it was to have their studios next to each other, next to other artists, and the camaraderie and just the energy. And it must have been so different this year for all of you, and wondered, you know, what that was like. And maybe you did have connection. I guess I'm curious as to, did you not have connection with one another?
At least for me, it was a huge switch. I had been in your third year at PAFA, you typically get to work in a gang studio space, so kind of a big room that's divided up a little. And so we were very used to being with each other all the time because we had 6-hour-a-day classes. And then, you know, our studio space was communal as well. So that was a really big switch. For me, it was a challenge, but it also did push me to really dig deep about what I wanted to make, maybe in ways I wouldn't have if I had still been at PAFA. But in a lot of ways, I really did miss that community, and it was very difficult. So I don't know, does anyone else have insight into how that was?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Tessa. Oh, sorry, Nasir, did you want to say something, or?
You got it, I'll go ahead.
Okay, I mean, I'll just speak for a little bit. I know I'm a fully remote student, and the last time I was on campus was March of 2020. So as a transfer student, I already had a very short time on campus. So for me, it was definitely tricky because I didn't even have any kind of preconceived notion of what I should be kind of experiencing at PAFA. But I know in my short time, you know, classes with other students, and then, you know, kind of looking over people's shoulders during breaks for the model was really helpful to me, just because I didn't get a lot of experience with oil painting, and I definitely relate to Nasir with this hesitancy because there's a large tradition with the materiality of oil paint. It's pretty daunting, but just seeing everybody's personal approaches to, you know, the same thing that you're looking at is really helpful. So I definitely missed that. Social media is somewhat helpful. I tried to track down people in the PAFA community to keep in touch with, because sometimes people will post their artwork. But other than that, that's really the only glimpses I get is, you know, trying to track people down on social media and see what they're up to. But
I'll say for me, it was interesting because I also was a transfer student at PAFA, like Mary Beth. And for me, the relationship with all the students was very important, that I transferred at a point where I wasn't sure I was going to continue making art. And being around everyone was a very strong factor of me making things, being inspired, that it was almost going into complete isolation. But on the flip side of that, I feel like I actually strived more than ever in the past year with freedom and flexibility of just doing what I want with no set time schedules. But I did find myself reaching out to people more directly than the natural people kind of catching by and just happenstance feedback. If someone's walking by and seeing something and talking to them about it, that was more direct, me reaching out, hey, can you talk to me about this, or want to talk about what you're doing? So it was a mix of things for me.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
The answers, everyone. Yeah, I noticed too when you were presenting that you were, even if you were more separate than usual, you all are still so related in the work, and you're noticing what people are doing in their installations, and it's great to see that community thrive even when we're all having to social distance.
I have a comment, but I don't know how to raise my hand.
Eva, welcome.
Hi. I just want to say it's really encouraging and fascinating to hear that more than one of you are finding yourself doing something that you never considered yourself doing or even swore that you wouldn't. And I remember when I was visiting PAFA and when I out of high school, I remember hearing a lot of the students say like, oh, I'm now a sculpting major, and I came in thinking I was a painter. And it's just, I'm a third year right now. And yeah, it's just encouraging and inspiring to know that you can shift courses so many, and just but in like 3 or 4 years. So it's exciting to see, or it's exciting to then look forward and see what will happen after school for so many of us. So yeah, I love seeing everyone's work.
Yeah, there's if Michael is still here, he'll remember in one of the crits I had with him, a group crit, I said specifically that I don't like sculpting and I'm never gonna do it. And I said, I've already thought about it, and I thought about it a long time ago, and people were like, you should try sculpting. I was like, I'm not gonna do that. And now it's just like sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy of where you're gonna make yourself look stupid. Like, it's bound to happen if you say that. That's the point. If you say you're not going to do something, it's going to happen, and just specifically to make you look a little silly. So.
Yeah, I definitely relate. I think it's funny because like I remember going to like choosing art school because I wanted to be a painter. I was like, I want to call myself a painter because it has this like really high art connotation of like, I'm a painter. I don't know. It's always been so romantic, and I think there's like a point where you're like, I can keep doing this thing that everyone likes that I'm doing, and it's like, it's fine. Or there's like a point, I think, in your work where it kind of tells you you need to do something else. It's like, it's there, and you can like listen to it and just be honest with yourself, or you can like force something. And like either one works, I think, because sometimes I think there's a resilience in being like, well, I want to make this kind of work, and I see that happen a lot, and that's totally fine. But there's like a really pure approach to art making, I think, when you like let your art sort of tell you what it wants you to make, if that makes sense. I don't know, kind of a weird thing, but
Yeah, if I can come back with that, that's what happened to me. I'm very strongly, I've like had this sort of stylization in my work for like years, since like high school. And it really, I feel like it only got to this point because I figured out how to be a little less self-conscious when I work. Like when I had that the dress that's sort of shaped like a tombstone, the red dress. The reason it like occurred to me to do that is because I was stapling canvas on the wall, which is normally how I get like my rectangular paintings up onto the wall, and I like had to put it over my head, and like I like was underneath it like a blanket, and like, this is like a piece of fabric. And I was like, can I actually make something that is experimental in the way that it's a piece of fabric? It was very, and I just let myself do it, which is actually a lot harder than I thought it would be. And again, just like forcing myself to eat my own words, I guess.
I'd like to jump in on the conversation for a second. Abby and I have talked about this a bit. I think it's so interesting, like questions of definition, and PAFA's at the undergraduate level anyway is a pretty discipline oriented place. And then when you get into your studio, it's totally wide open and you can do anything you want to do. It doesn't matter what your area of study is, but sometimes I think it takes a little while to realize that, like, oh, I can do whatever I want. But you know, what we call painting, you know, I call a lot of Abby's work painting, and I certainly would call Callie's work painting, but I think given our how we define things at PAFA, sometimes we don't think of that as painting, or we're sort of getting outside of the bounds. But I just think I don't know, it kind of speaks to both the foundation that students learn at PAFA through the disciplines, and then the wide openness that happens in your fourth year, where you're surprising yourself. And I think as artists, that's what we want to do. We want to surprise ourselves and make things that we didn't even imagine, right? And I just want to congratulate everyone. I think the show looks amazing. I love seeing this year. It's the first time it's happened since I've been at PAFA anyway, where the undergraduates are in the HLB and the graduates are in Hamilton. I think that worked out really nicely. And it was so nice to see a bunch of you installing your work, having conversations. It felt almost slightly normal to me, which was wonderful. So thank you all for producing such amazing work for us all to view and enjoy. And congratulations.
Thanks, Clint, and thanks everyone. It feels like such a wonderful place to end tonight. We do have just a couple minutes of folks, if any of the artists want to share a little bit about that studio transformation that you were talking about, the thing that kind of happens. But otherwise, it's been so nice to have you all. This is really such a strong group of artists. You all should be so proud. And I'm so excited to get to go to the Historic Landmark Building and see these pieces in person. I'm going to let the artists all say goodbye, but before we do, I wanted to just quickly put in a plug that we do have another Toast to ASE that's going to be with our graduate students. So a lot of different work, and that's going to be on Tuesday, May 18th, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat. Also, I'll put the recording of this up so you can see it or share it with whomever, because I know not everyone could be with us this evening. And also, please go see the work. Join the preview party next week on Thursday. Support these artists and our scholarship fund, and also just go physically look at some of this work. I know I will as soon as possible. So artists, if you'd like to each say goodbye, feel free to unmute yourself and in no order.
Thank you everybody for coming, and we hope maybe to talk to you more about our work if you have future questions.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to all the professors who came today. I really hope I sort of imparted how much PAFA has meant to me and how sad I am to go. I really don't want to leave. You're gonna have to pry me out. It's horrible. Again, thank you for coming, and thank you for listening to all of us and me speak about my work. Thank you.
Callie, we can lock ourselves to the doors. They can't get us all out, but thank you.
There's locks on the doors. The keys are non-copy, so.
So you've thought about that?
Yes.
If you don't want to go, don't go.
You can always come back.
Yeah, I definitely want to speak to that. I'm very thankful that I found PAFA, and even just short time, it was worth it. I'd love to come back sometime. So, I mean, I'm thinking of ways I can get back. That's just what the institution does. It's really made a tremendous impact on me, and it's like the tight communities. I found a lot of acceptance within the community. previously I just came from, I guess, an institution that wasn't right for me. So it was really refreshing to come to PAFA and get a breath of fresh air, I guess.
Yeah, Mary Beth, I totally agree with you there with PAFA. Really, just for some people, it just totally feels like home. And it's just been an absolutely invaluable experience for me. So thank you everyone for coming tonight.
Yeah, it was really nice to see everyone's work also. Like, I don't think I've seen a lot of your work since it's been your last year, and it was really nice to see everyone talk about it. And nice to have all our professors here that have been with us. So thank you.
Hey, Mary Beth, we're so happy to have you here and have the ability to pick all your knowledge about materials, because you're the go-to.
Thank you. I mean, I really appreciate it, but I learn as much from everybody else. Yeah, it's so fun to see everyone else's process and learn about how everyone else approaches work.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say I've really enjoyed my time here at PAFA. I feel like the stars aligned almost with coming here and choosing this as the school where I decide to have an education in art. And I'm really grateful for all the opportunities that were given to me and the rest of the student body. And I've made a lot of friends and connections here, and I'll miss it a lot. So thank you for your support and for being here today.
Thank you, Kaela. Congrats to all of you. Yeah, so looking forward to seeing everything.
Abby, can I just jump in and thank you for hosting? And I see CJ on the call, and I'm not sure if Kate or Brian are here, and maybe they were acknowledged already, but they did such an amazing job of helping everybody install. So thanks to the whole team that makes it happen.
Good. Thanks, everybody. All right, feel free to say goodbye on the way out. We love hearing from you and hope to see you all in another Zoom or maybe in person sometime soon.
Bye, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.